Alright, so welcome to day one, for us anyway, of not spring break anymore. I hope you guys all had a very relaxing break and stayed healthy and everything, and now it's time to get back into it. Today's video is not going to be very content heavy. We're just sort of sticking our toes in the water of this new virtual thing we're doing going forward. One of the purposes of this video is both to acclimate you guys to what we're going to be doing for at least the next few weeks, if not the rest of the semester, but also to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm going to look and see how many of you complete the quiz that's related to this video, which again don't be too scared of these quizzes. They're going to be unlimited attempts. You're going to be able to rewatch any part of this video you want to as needed to get the answers you need for the quizzes. So don't stress out about them too much. These are going to be the pop-up portion of our grade going forward. As I have mentioned already about that part of our grade, those are kind of the easy parts of the grade for you guys. But I'm going to see who completed the pop-up. That's going to be part of the attendance that's going to be kept tomorrow morning once you guys have completed it. And whoever didn't complete it, I'm going to contact everyone who needs to be contacted about who didn't attend for the day. And once we're pretty much all on the same page, on Friday we'll begin the content as scheduled, which will be what was scheduled next? That would be aggregate expenditures, right? That part is still due on Connect. There's no change to Connect assignments. The due dates are the same. You're not going to get additional Connect assignments. Our usual 55-minute classes are going to be replaced by these videos. So the quizzes for the videos, they're going to be under the quiz tab on D2L. The videos are going to be under content, which is where, if you're listening to this or watching it, then you already know that. The quizzes are going to be under the quizzes tab, and those are going to be due by 9 p.m. For the night that the video is released. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night. That is Wednesday night and Friday night of this week, and then Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of every other week. Expect to complete those quizzes every week. That's our way of taking attendance, and of course you will get positive points for the pop-up portion of your grade for doing that. And then again, McGraw-Hill stuff, the Connect stuff, there's no change to that, so be sure to get the next assignment done by midnight Friday night as usual. And as far as the exams are concerned, exam 3 and exam 4, those aren't scheduled until towards the end of the semester as it is. Exam 3 is on the last set of things we're going to cover starting on Friday. And then exam 4 is the final exam that's cumulative for the entire semester. It may be that we're back to face-to-face stuff by then. I'm kind of expecting we're not going to be, but we might be. So stay tuned on those. They may be done in the quizzes part of D2L as well. So stay tuned on those. Do the same thing with Connect. Watch all the videos that I assign to you. Complete the quizzes. You can watch the videos as many times as you need to. Fast forward as you need to complete the quizzes. Do those as many times as you need to. They're easy points, so take them. A few other things to know about just procedurally how we're going to move forward. I think I covered most of it, but there is the Economics Help Center that so far I don't think any of you have used it at Front Range. None of you have come in while I'm there, which is fine. We don't really expect any of you will. You have to commute from CEC all the way to Front Range. I know it's not that long of a commute, but it may be for some of you, and it's either during the school day or right at the end. Now it's a little bit more accessible to you. We're all kind of barred from campus unless we have special permission as it is. So we're going to be doing everything at the Help Center and the Tutoring Center going forward through WebEx meetings. And as Front Range students, you should have access to WebEx using your Front Range email. So if you need any extra tutoring help, you can go to those Help Center sessions. You don't have to go while I'm there. You can go while others are there. at the scheduled times. It's not going to be open this week, but I believe we're going to start next week. Those of us who are going to be staffing the center, staffing it means we're going to be in our homes like I am right now, sitting there on our WebEx, watching the screen, waiting for people to pop in, and then giving help as needed when people do. So that extra resource that's always been available to you is now, if anything, maybe a little bit more available to you. If you can watch this video, then you can certainly go to the Help Center too. So let's see, looking at my notes. Oh yes, one other thing, we only have one video for today's assignment, for today's video and quiz assignment, but there may be more than one video, there will be more than one video for other days, not for all days, but for other days. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is to take advantage of the ability to further compartmentalize each topic. For learning, it's easier to separate things out, divide them up. Chunking is something that memory experts will tell people to do, break things into chunks and memorize the chunks. It's easier to process information that way. It's also known that shorter lectures, shorter times in lecture will work better. You'll process that information better. We can't always do that in a classroom format, but since we can do it in this format, I'm going to try to take advantage of that as much as I can. So some topics like Federal Reserve System, that's going to take the entire class time, maybe longer, while other topics are going to be a little bit shorter. And to the extent that I can divide things up, I actually may be able to divide the Federal Reserve stuff up a little bit. I'm going to do that. So it's easier for you to process it. It also gives you shorter videos to watch. It might be a little daunting to see that a video is 50 minutes long and you have to sit through 50 minutes worth of content versus a 20-minute video and a 15-minute video and I guess a 10-minute video, something like that. That might be a little bit less daunting, and of course you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You don't have to do any of these in one sitting, but it's easier to just, okay, I'll watch the first 20-minute one now, and then I'll watch the 15-minute one, etc. So because we can do that and it makes learning easier for you, we will do that. I want to do anything that makes learning easier for you. So we're going to break up. Oh, and there will be other videos to post, to watch that I'm going to post that aren't me. Remember my little Cameron Diaz promise to show as many movies as I can get away with. There is one in particular when we get into money and how it works. It's going to be it's going to be 20 plus minutes worth of the great sitcom Raising Hope that explained money and what it is and how it works better than I ever could. It's a perfect econ instruction video disguised as a very funny sitcom. So you're going to watch that, and then you're going to watch me pontificate about it. And then you're going to have to answer quiz questions about both. So that's how we're going to go moving forward. As for today, again, we're not going to get into the content you're going to be tested on until Friday, but I still want this video to be longer than the less than 9 minutes it currently is. I kind of need it to be. We have 55 minutes of class time to cover. I'm not necessarily going to get all of it because a lot of that is for question and answer. And please do, by the way, contact me with any questions you have and I'll answer them. We're not going to have a discussion section, and this may be the only online class you will ever take that doesn't have a discussion section. You probably already have been doing discussions for some of your other classes. Maybe some of your instructors haven't been trained to do online teaching, so it doesn't occur to them, or they use that as an excuse not to do it. I have been certified as an online instructor, and people make a big deal about the discussion. You have to do the discussion question. It gets everyone engaged, makes them feel like they're in class together. I get that. From a theoretical standpoint, all the online classes I've taken, there was a discussion component of the grade. I understand why it does work to make you feel like you're engaged with the class and community and all of that, but I've never quite gotten the sense that there's a lot of learning going on. I guess if you're really good at the discussion sections, you can use it as a way to aid with learning. But well, as I've told you guys before, I'm very utilitarian in my approach here. Everything I do, I want it to be if it's not going to be educational, I want it to at least be enjoyable. It's necessary to have some enjoyment disruptions to refresh the mind, so to speak, and make it a little bit easier to learn going forward. There's a lot of learning theory on that. I don't want to give you guys any busy work. Everything I have you doing, I want it to be something that you're going to benefit from. So at least I don't think I can make a discussion that's going to enhance anything else we're doing that isn't going to be redundant for you guys or something like that. So we're not doing discussion questions, but there are still ways for you to communicate with me through comment sections, or preferably through email through D2L is where all of our communication is coming from. Ask any questions you have. The WebEx meetings, the WebEx Help Center hours, you can certainly pop by any of those if you want some live back and forth with me, and we can also set up meetings to sometimes to meet on WebEx outside of those Help Center times, just as was in the syllabus. You can set appointments with me, and we'll go over whatever you need help with as needed. But other than that, we're right. Other than that, we're how did I get onto this? Oh yeah, it was to say that we have 55 minutes worth of class time. A lot of that is for a lot of discussion in class. I'm not necessarily going to have all the videos add up to 55 minutes per class period, but they're going to get close. I want to cover most of it without stretching things out just for the sake of being redundant, but they are going to add up to 55 if there's more than one video. And if there's one video, it's going to get close to 55. And if there's more than one video, it won't add up to 55, but it'll get close to it. So do expect to watch at least about 45 minutes worth of videos 3 days a week, and then to answer questions about it to show that you paid some attention and learned something. So what are we going to talk about today if it's not content specific? Well, it is going to be econ specific. It's basically the economics of coronavirus. And I'm going to cover that not because actually a lot of it is very relevant to what we're doing in our course. Some things we've already covered, some things we're going to cover. It's going to be a good thing to relate a lot of stuff to, but it's also because I've already had a lot of students ask me about this. It's kind of natural when people know you're an economist, they'll ask you about the burning economic questions on their mind. And of course, just about everybody has some economic questions surrounding coronavirus right now. So I'm going to give you kind of my take on some of what's out there, some of the news you might have been reading, might be some of the same stuff I've been reading. Of course, I see something about the economics of what's going on here. I click on it and I read it and I'm fascinated by it. That's why I do this for a living. So what are the economics of the coronavirus? Well, they're obviously bad. We kind of all know that. There really isn't anybody who's saying that the economy isn't suffering right now. It certainly is. Whenever people aren't working, we're not producing, and when we're not producing, we're not generating value, and that's bad for the economy. It's not just that people aren't earning a paycheck, it's that stuff isn't being made, as we've discussed, and we'll discuss further when we talk about money. Money doesn't mean anything if there aren't real goods and services to relate it to. So this is obviously bad. How bad, we don't know, and you may have noticed that you haven't seen anything definitive about specifically how bad it's gotten. And that's for a reason, and you may already know that reason if you remember some of what we've talked about. Economic indicators are recorded on a lag. Anytime we get data on what GDP is, what unemployment is, we're getting old data about what GDP was and what unemployment was about a month or more ago when it was measured. So what GDP is now, what unemployment is now, we can guess. There are some estimates, but we really won't know until even the first Friday of April. Remember, that's when the BEA releases unemployment statistics. That's going to be the beginning of things. The May statistics may be a bit more of an accurate take on what unemployment, quote, is now. April's not going to be that inaccurate, but we're not going to know until then what unemployment is now. I think everyone agrees it'll probably be a bit higher. How much higher, we don't know, though, because some people who we might expect are unemployed aren't unemployed. They may not be going to work, but they may still be receiving a paycheck, or they may at least still be nominally employed and they're not searching for employment anywhere else. And remember, that's an important part of the unemployment metric. You have to be actively looking for work. A lot of people who aren't working right now may not be actively looking for work. So we may get an unemployment figure that's a little distorted, and it may be necessary to look at the other unemployment numbers that aren't necessarily going to be reported. Remember the U4, 5, and 6 numbers. But we won't know that until later. We won't know GDP until later. But what we do have are projections. Got to be really careful about reading anything into projections, models. They are all based on ifs. If this happens, if that happens, we'll just assume that this is what's happening or gonna happen. And if all of these variables and parameters line up correctly, these are the results we're gonna see. I'm criticizing them, but you kind of have to cut modelers some slack because they're trying to predict the future. And predicting the future is virtually impossible, which is part of why you need to take anything you read with a grain of salt. I read one story about a week ago that some major banks had projected that unemployment or the recession, the economy is going to be in recession. It's going to be 3 to 5% by July. Then more recently, I think this actually may have been today, I read an article that there were projections that the economy is going to contract by as much as 50% and unemployment is going to rise to 30%. Obviously, those are humongous numbers. But again, these are projections. These are based on a lot of if scenarios. Maybe reductions in consumption that can be estimated right now are going to be carried through with estimates of marginal propensities to consume that are estimated right now, and then math is going to be used to project a number, and that's a number we're going to go with at a certain date. If what I just said doesn't make much sense, you probably haven't done much of this week's McGraw-Hill assignment, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. You don't need to know it quite yet. But that's what some of it is based on. That's what a lot of it is based on, quite frankly. And there are a lot of... It is a lot of estimating. Some of the consumption changes, they may not be constant. They usually aren't constant. They can go up and down over the period during which the estimates are being made. Marginal propensities to consume can change dramatically. And they can change dramatically due to a lot of different things. We don't know when the economy is going to, quote, open back up. Certain parts might open up. Certain parts might open up on their own, whether anybody is saying they should or not, just because people can't remain idle forever. We have to produce things. So there are a lot of unknowns here. This is literally something we've never seen before, not in the modern age anyway, and a whole entire society shutting down like this. So any predictions are people just guessing, and they may be educated guesses, and they may be accurate in the final analysis, but don't let yourself be too scared by any of these predictions. There are also the inevitable comparisons to the Great Depression and the 2008 financial crisis. There's pretty much every year you can find somebody since the Great Depression saying the next Great Depression is happening. There were people who were saying it was going to happen in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. There are always people saying the next one's right around the corner. Since 2008, another 2008 is about to happen, or this could lead us to another 2008. You hear it all the time. You're going to hear it all the time. And, of course, this is being compared to it. And certain metrics might line up. Certainly the degree to which the economy is contracting may very well. Wouldn't be surprised if it turns out to be as deep as 2008, and unemployment, again, I wouldn't be at all surprised if it does rise as high as 2008 or post-2008 levels, which got to around 11%. But as scary as all of that sounds, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. This is a very, very different type of economic crisis. It's based on different things. The Great Depression and financial crisis were different for a lot of reasons, but they had a very key similarity, and that was the financial system essentially was finding itself melting down and falling to pieces and seizing up. Seizing up meaning that whoever survived the destruction in the financial sector in both those crises, they weren't lending anything. Investments shut down, which means no new businesses were starting, but a lot of businesses were going away. So the economy was receding, but it wasn't growing. And it took a long time for growth to happen again because investment didn't happen again for a very long time in both cases. This is not a financial crisis. And I heard some criticisms of the White House briefing just today that talked about the relief packages that are being sent out, and it was said it's not a financial crisis. There were some criticisms, and I was waiting to hear the criticism that this is a financial crisis, and they didn't quite get there. They went off into other areas of criticism that may have been valid, but a financial crisis in the sense that banks are about to cease to exist. They're not going to have money. They're not going to lend. All lending institutions are going to go out of business or not lend going forward. That's what's meant by a financial crisis, and so far, that doesn't appear to be what's happening. And that's very, very, very important. We have had massive recessions outside of the Great Depression in 2008 that weren't as famous. And the reason they weren't as famous is because the recoveries were very quick. And the recoveries were quick because the financial system wasn't destroyed during those recessions, even when some of them were panics. Even the 1980 savings and loan crisis, late 70s, early 80s, that was a real crisis and it was really painful, but the recovery was somewhat quick because the overall financial system was still basically healthy. When the financial system is willing to lend again, then a lot of economic problems go away very fast and they become distant memories rather quickly. So far, our financial system is still alive, it's still healthy, it's not lending. But that doesn't mean it's not going to lend. As soon as things open back up, there are going to be a lot of people going to banks looking to lend, and banks have a lot of liquidity. Now we're getting into sort of end of semester stuff that you'll understand better at the end of the semester, but liquidity, it basically means banks have cash. On banks' balance sheets, they'll have loans that they've given out, they'll have cash, and they'll have bonds. Cash is one of the worst things for banks to have, but they have to have some in case somebody wants to withdraw money. But they don't want to hang on to cash. It's a depreciating asset, which means it loses value over time. They want to put it into something. They'll put some of it into bonds, and then they'll put the rest into loans. And they'll charge interest on those loans. They make more money that way. In other words, they want to lend it out. They want to make loans. They want to essentially fuel the economy, even if they're not thinking of it that way. That's what happens when banks lend out all the cash they have. So you may have already heard of a lot of injections of liquidity into the banks by the Federal Reserve System. I'll get into a second what might be problematic about that, but we are still going to have a banking system where most banks, for now anyway, are alive. They're going to be sitting on a lot of cash, and they're not going to want to continue sitting on that cash. They're going to want to lend it out. There are going to be a lot of credit-worthy borrowers, people whose businesses were healthy until all of this went south, who are going to want new loans, and they're going to go to eager lenders to get those loans. They get the financing. A lot of their old employees are probably not going to be working elsewhere. A lot of them are maybe not going to be working elsewhere, and those who are going to perhaps be easily replaced if unemployment is a little high, so they're going to be able to get back to old levels of production rather quickly, and we could see the economy looking almost exactly like it did. Actually, historically, that is the precedent. Deep recessions followed by large recoveries. Small recessions followed by small recoveries. There's some symmetry in the size of recessions and the size of the recoveries that follow. The Great Depression and financial crisis are the two exceptions to the rules of that symmetry. So as scary as a lot of these numbers sound, it might all be okay in the end. You're not going to hear a lot of that from a lot of people. I'm a little bit unique among economists in which I will predict positive outcomes if I see them. The reason I think I may have mentioned this in our classes, the incentives always favor doom and gloom proclamations by economists. Always. If you really think about it, economists who predict good times, when bad times happen, people will kind of be a little grouchy with them for having predicted good things, and then everything turned out poorly. And you look like a Pollyanna and you don't look very serious. And if you're right, well, okay, great, you were right, but it's also oftentimes forgotten. Now, if you predict recessions, if they don't happen, hey, we're happy I was wrong, but my theories were sound. And if they do happen, then you look like a genius. You may have seen a lot of things being sold. Hey, this person predicted the 2008 financial crisis, and now they're saying another thing is coming, and there's one thing you need to buy to protect yourself from it. And of course, it's a way of getting you to subscribe to something. It's always free in the beginning, but in the end, you have to subscribe to something to get some information that in the end might not be very useful to you, but you were sold on the fact that, hey, this person called it. The 100-year history of economic prognostications is a history of economists almost always getting things wrong. Economists have been predicting recessions. Pretty much every year you can see an economist predicting recessions because that'll get the headlines. Again, we've talked about how doom and gloom sells. People believed the world was going to end in 2012, not because it was based on anything. It was based on a lot of fallacies about Mayan prophecies that didn't exist, or a Mayan calendar that supposedly ended that didn't actually end and is still ongoing today, but it's sold. People were drawn in. People are drawn into these things. There's always an incentive to predict the worst. Hyman Minsky is a name you might know if you've watched any films on the 2008 crisis, those who try to argue that it was a completely secular phenomenon. We'll talk about Hyman Minsky's separating out of different types of investors to show that some are good for the economy, others are prone to creating bubbles and things like that. And he was largely forgotten until 2008, but there was a joke about him that he successfully predicted 7 of the last 2 recessions or something like that. And that's actually pretty common among, it wasn't just Minsky, it's pretty much every economist. So you're usually only going to hear the worst case scenarios. You're not going to hear a whole lot of reassurance except from those rare people who are incentivized to reassure us. And that's usually politicians who can take credit for any good that happens, or who want people to support them now, or things are going to be good if I get elected. Those are pretty much the only ones who say that anything good is going to happen. So the Great Depression, almost nobody predicted it. There were always people predicting recessions who can say they predicted it, but they didn't predict the exact mechanics of what happened. It pretty much caught everyone by surprise. And the next big crisis really was the 1970s. Nobody predicted the oil embargoes and all the economic troubles that came after that for the next decade or so were based on something that no economist was predicting, certainly. The dot-com bubble burst, followed shortly thereafter by 9/11. No one predicted that. A few people predicted the 2008 crisis, but a lot of them were just predicting recessions. Not a lot of people predicting economic crashes that actually happened, but everybody predicts economic crashes. Meanwhile, the strong growth of the 50s, pretty much nobody who wasn't in office saying times are going to be good under me, i.e. Eisenhower, nobody else was predicting that. Nobody predicted the 90s. Nobody predicted the mid-2000s. Nobody predicted the last few years, except for those who stood to benefit politically if it did happen, which is kind of like a broken clock being right twice a day. Even if these are intelligent people who predicted correct things for correct reasons. I mean, FDR predicted that good time, happy days are ahead in the 30s, and then his entire presidency was an economic nightmare. So everyone is going to predict that under me things are going to be great, And then when they're not, they blame other people. And if you don't have those incentives facing you, then you're going to predict bad things because you don't lose credibility when you're wrong. And everybody's happy when you're wrong. And then when you're right, you get credibility. So that doesn't mean that anybody who's predicting the worst and that it's going to last for years, it doesn't mean that any of them are wrong. It's just something to keep in mind before you get worried about the fact that you might graduate into a really rough economy that isn't getting better anytime soon. It could be that by the time you graduate from high school, those of you who are seniors, everything's going to be back to normal, or everything's going to be back to normal soon. So I guess I didn't necessarily answer anything, but these are all things to keep in mind. So, oh yeah, I promised I would get to possible problems with all the injections of liquidity into the banking system. That's a reason to think that we might have an economic boom waiting for us as soon as the economy is allowed to function again. This was an economy where almost all indicators said that things were strong. We had a strong economy, we had real growth, and it hadn't been going on for very long, which means the recession that every growth period builds towards, it wasn't going to be coming around for a few years. So we have strong, solid fundamentals, at least according to some economists. There might be some who disagree. But when you have strong fundamentals plus a lot of liquidity in banks who are looking to further finance additional growth, those are the makings of an economic boom. However, all of that liquidity comes from the form of, remember, M times V equals P times Y, the equation of exchange that gives us hyperinflation. It comes from a lot of additional M. But we don't have any additional Y. But that M is going to get out there in order to produce more Y. But what if that's shaky production and the Y collapses? We might just be left with higher prices. So there are hyperinflation concerns. I kind of got into a little bit why hyperinflation doesn't necessarily happen from large injections of cash into the banking system. It's because it doesn't get out until the Y part of the equation rises. I'm going to go into that in a little more detail when we talk about monetary policy. I've already alluded to it before and promised we talk about it with monetary policy. But then there's also the fact that the package that I was talking about today is $6 trillion. The annual budget for this past year was something like $4 trillion. So in one bill, we're spending more than we've ever spent in any 1 year period ever in our country's history. That has a lot of people thinking that we're starting to build a little bit of a debt bomb that's going to implode. They may be right. If the economy booms again, remember how automatic stabilizers work. A lot of new revenue is going to come right back in, and a lot of that spending is very short term. So the spending stops, but revenues start flooding back in. So that $6 trillion addition to the deficit can contract very quickly and become a smaller addition to the deficit. And again, remember, the problem, deficits and debts don't become a problem until servicing that debt crowds out the entire budget. So we have to make tough decisions about what to spend if we can't borrow more. We're still not anywhere close to that. We're still bringing in far more in revenue than it costs us to service the deficit, to service our existing debt, even with this additional $6 trillion. So it could be the thing that really accelerates us to that point where we can't borrow anymore. But even then, a lot of wasteful government can be cut away, hopefully first before more productive stuff is cut away. But again, that's a big if thing where we don't really know what's going to happen. But there's plenty of reason to believe that it's not going to be anything like the debt crises that we've seen in places like Greece 8 or 9 years ago now, whenever that was. So there are definitely going to be people who are concerned about it and who might raise some alarm bells, but take a pause before you join in the panic with that sort of thing. They may be right, but there are good reasons to believe they may be wrong. So I think that's all I've got on the economics of the coronavirus. There are a few questions about this video under the quiz tool. Answer them by 9 p.m. and you will get credit for attendance and credit for pop-ups. And until then, do your work on Connect, and I'll see you in the video on aggregate expenditures.